Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Genesis Star Trek Next Generation one-shot Grey Nova. So I recently ran a Star Trek Next Generation one-shot using a self-contained game, one session. So excuse me, it specifically was over the using the Genesis system, which is the universal role-playing system recently created by Fantasy Flight Games. Now, Genesis is a universal role-playing game system, the same as Cypher, the same as Fate, which allows you to run, which specifically allows you to run any setting you want using the Star Wars narrative dice. And this is the really important part of Genesis. The Star Wars narrative dice really are fantastic. They really allow rolls. Like when you roll the dice in a Star Wars, when you roll the dice in Genesis using the Star Wars narrative dice, it really is transformative because anything can happen in that roll. You have 6 symbols. You have success, advantage, triumph. You also have, and those are all positive symbols, and then you have the counterpart at negative, which is a fail, a threat, and a despair. Okay? Excuse me. So with all that going on, you have this situation where you can really come out of a roll with a complete failure, but also a triumph effect. You can get advantage. You can get no successes, but you can get advantages. All these kind of things, really fantastic. So I had chosen the Star Trek Next Generation setting, and so we started with that. So I was really blessed. We had 4 players who were interested, who showed up to play, and we had, and essentially we had 2 medical officers. One, and they were both chief medical officers. We had 1 chief engineering officer, and we had a first officer. Okay, so which was really, really interesting, just the way the whole thing rolled out. There was a little bit of an interesting, having 2 medical officers was a little bit of an issue. The way that we split it out was one of them I had become a special. I gave them each 1 extra skill rank. One of them got an extra skill point in an extra to start with, got an extra rank in xenobiology, and one of them got an extra rank in regular biology, which would be used to treat humans. And so the way we dealt with this was that we were saying that the ship, which was they're all on the USS Bryce, which has the captain Jacqueline Maytine, right? And that she's essentially the captain. She is the captain of the ship. So essentially, what we said was that on the USS Bryce, they were specifically doing an experiment because many of the medical officers in Starfleet were struggling to adequately serve as the doctor for both alien races and human race. So they had split this up. So that's the way we handled it in the game. One thing that was kind of interesting at the beginning that I just want to talk about. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we had in the game. So I was really blessed. 3 out of my 4 players got really excited, had all their characters completely made, right? So when the game starts, right, everybody comes to the table, and my last player, who didn't know if he was going to be able to make it, just shows up with nothing, right? So I got 3 players ready to play, and I got 1 person starting at 0, right? And it was really interesting to me, the different expectations that were around that, right? So the person says, well, I want to play medical officer. That's completely reasonable. I said, no problem. Let's look at the archetypes. So we looked at archetypes real quick, literally 2 minutes. And I'm like, average human, labor, intellectual, diplomat, what do you want to play? And he's like, intellectual. And then we chose the other 2 parts, like what's your career, and then what is your race, right? And he's Vulcan. I said, okay, so for Vulcan, this is all we did for Vulcan. I was like, you get 2 extra knowledge skills, right? So he had his character done in no more than like 5 minutes, right? And we did, and I was also like, you're gonna have to go into the book while I'm actually running the game, and make sure you list out your skills and all that kind of thing. But we'll do that as I do my preamble. You'll do that as I do my preamble, right? So, and essentially, and the only reason I'm pointing this out is I have showed up at games where the same thing happens. And the game master, I remember specifically, a Shadowrun game, 5 players, one guy shows up, exact same situation. And the game master just sat down and took 50 minutes and made that dude's character. And by the time we were ready to play, I was ready to leave. I was just like, there's 4 other people here, and you're going to just take an hour of their time and throw it out the window. It was very distressing to me, right? And so my player, who was the Vulcan, he goes, well, what about my mind meld? What about my, the Vulcan death grip? I said, write both of those on your sheet. The moment that you use any of them, we will actually stat it. And this is what I call run and build, right? And I highly suggest doing this for any kind of Genesis TRPG. And the reason why is when you do run and build, you just write down whatever you have as a trait, and then you literally create it once you get to that point in time, right? And it takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and you can't spend more than 2 or 3 minutes, right? And what that means is there's a possibility it's not going to be balanced, right? So one of the things that you do is, one, you give the player the benefit of the doubt, and you try to make sure that is powerful for them. And then you just explain to everybody, because we're building this on the fly, the way this works this session absolutely may be adjusted in next session, right? And there's a little bit of it's not ideal, right? But it's way better to have everybody playing, and rather than wait for weeks and weeks to build everything out, it's just a better model, right? Especially for today, right? Because people don't have a lot of time. People move, they're promoted, they win the lottery, a million different things, right? You want to just get at the table, get the game rolling, right? And so it worked really well, and I was really excited about it, right? So, and I'm also fortunate to have players that are reasonable and that kind of go with the flow. So now I will say this: I guarantee my players would much rather prefer that I had spent 4 weeks statting this out and then started, right? But it's just not. Doesn't match modern life, in my opinion, right? So, and you do what you can, and you just keep moving, right? So, with that said, we're jumping into the game, right? And so we start with all the player characters floating in open space, surrounded by meteorites, which are in an asteroid belt, with jostling meteorites going around. And I said, every 2, so one, you are all here studying the Void Sharn. And the Void Sharn are a brand new discovered race, not a brand new discovered creature in the Star Trek universe, right? And so these Void Sharns, there's 3 of them. 2 of them are about 60 feet long. They look similar to whales, but they're made of, 1, they emit radiation, and 2, they are moving, but their bodies shift with light, and they're very amorphous, right? It's really hard to get a gauge on what they are. Now, I'd said you guys are in the middle of a 36-hour Starfleet standard bioscan of the Void Sharn, right? And, so you're documenting them so they can be added to the catalog of creatures that exist in space that are known by Starfleet, right? And so I mentioned these two Void Sharns are 60 feet long, but I also mentioned that there's one more that is only 12 feet long, right? And then at that point, my xenobiologist medical officer comes in and says, well, the first thing we need to determine is if they're sentient, right? Because we're treating them we're going to catalog them like creatures, but they very well may be sentient, which means that they could be members of Starfleet, right? And that just kicked off this really robust conversation among the players about, well, how are we going to determine if they're sentient? And I also had, an ensign there who was part of the cataloging team, and that person kind of jumped in, and there was a conversation. There's this really robust conversation about what is sentience, how are we going to catalog if this creature is sentience, and also, you know, there was speculation that, you know, the two larger creatures were a mother and a father, and that the youngest one was the child, and that, you know, they had familial bonds, which would help, and it looked like they were exhibiting familial bonds to one of the doctors, or I'm sorry, to actually one of the NPCs, and other, you know, and then the PCs were coming back and saying, oh, well, how do you know, you know, the small one isn't the parent, and the two large ones are the babies. It was really cool. We really had a good time with it, right? So at this point, then they're all in the middle of space, and they're having to make rolls very frequently, or they get crushed by asteroids that are bouncing around, right? So there's threat even from the environment, which I was excited about. And you know, players were like, oh boy, you know, like, so this is going on, and then we have then I actually introduced the ship's captain, who is not on site but in the ship, which is completely off scene, right? So the USS Bryce, the captain calls in, and they're doing a conference call, right? Well, all the player characters are in the middle of a 12-hour are in the middle of this shift where they're at site, you know, with this new creature, right, that's being cataloged. And I said, you know, you're now going to have a conference call with the captain, because one of the algorithms on the ship has called out that there's a significant risk to productivity, and there needs to be a command decision made about this significant risk, right? And so, you know, these ships are automated in many ways, and one of these algorithms, this chief science officer that goes over the computers, is presenting a risk that the computer called out. And the risk was Oak Forge, and so I show all the players, I show them one slide, like I run mine through like a PowerPoint deck. I actually use Google Slides. It's really helpful, completely free. And so it says Oak Forge on the top, and then on the bottom it has a symbol for a wizard, a fighter, a cleric, and a rogue, right? And just the symbols. And I say, how many of your players play in the holodeck game Oak Forge, right? And that's all that they got, right? So they had to decide. So like two players said, yes, I do play in Oak Forge. My character plays in Oak Forge. And two were like, no, I don't do that, right? And so the people who did play in Oak Forge immediately got one additional rank in any skill that any Starfleet officer would have that was from a group outside their own group. So, you know, security, medical, helms, you know, they could get, and the reason why was, and so then at that point, the chief science officer, you know, presents why they're talking this day, and says the reason we're talking this day is specifically because you need to understand that, that essentially Oak Forge, this holodeck game, which is a fantasy-based holodeck with wizards, rogues, clerics, and fighters, has been being run by Masomi Kodai. He is a helmsman essentially, but he has built this really elaborate game within the holodeck, and a large number, you know, well over 200 people are players in this game. And what's happened is that the game has been so helpful to the crew that play it that has increased efficiency on the ship by 11%. Now, why is that a problem? Why is that a risk? Well, the risk is Masomi Kodai, if anything happens to him, the game is going to break down, right? Because it's a whole bunch of snarled spaghetti code that he wrote on the fly, and there's no documentation for, right? And you know, and there's protocols on the holodeck and all this kind of thing. So if anything happens to him, the game goes away overnight, and now the ship has a major problem, because, you know, most of these players are used to playing together, and it would be distressing to lose this game, which has really grown to mean a lot to all these players. So the ship is saying, right now is the time to shut this down. So rather than allow Masomi Kodai something to happen to him, even if he's promoted, or if he's, if he dies, you know, in action, or if he leaves Starfleet or whatever, then that's not going to be disruptive. We can handle shutting down the game now and do that in a way where we can talk to people and let people, this ship has a counselor, right? So, if people are sad about it, the counselors can, and so you can manage the shutdown rather than the shutdown happening. And it's a risk to and so the captain, Jacqueline Maytine, who I introduced at this time, she is known for tactical and strategic starship battling. And she's an incredibly aggressive captain. She's really, really aggressive, right? In fact, she really is often looking for reasons to fight. She's considered probably the most aggressive captain, starship battle-wise, in the entire Starfleet, right? And the reason why they're having this meeting, even while they're doing another job, rather than just sitting at a conference table, is this captain insists that all meetings happen on the fly, right? And all meetings are done while you're doing something else, and just over the conference line, because she absolutely hates sitting down, right? She's always moving, right? And actually, now this meeting happening allows me to ramp up the difficulties of the asteroid avoidance rolls, right? And also distracts all the players from their current, they're having to multitask, right? Which I thought, it's really cool. And actually, all the players complained. They're like, this isn't the best time for a meeting. We're in the middle of a freaking asteroid field, and the captain's like, hey, do what we need to do. We're a high performance team, so it was and actually, I think the players kind of complained to me, but not in character, which was kind of cool. So it was really good. It was going along, so it's moving along. Well, what happens at that point is the players see a group of other the player characters see a group of other characters coming through the asteroid field. They have been snuck up on, and it is a team of Ferengi merchants, 2 Ferengi merchants, who have come from a Decorah class ship, which snuck up on all of them, right? And that these 2 merchants have an entire team of 6 other mercenaries, right? So those mercenaries, the mercenaries and the Ferengis, they're here for the Void Charms, right? They realize that there's this new absolutely new creature, and they actually want to take them and actually sell them, right? And so they've come here for that reason. Well, what happens is the Ferengi and their mercenaries send out this drone and mark all the player characters, right? And it's like it sends out almost like a laser sight for a pistol, right? So they're not being fired on, but they are being read. You know what I mean? And so immediately one of the players turns on their phaser to stun and begins firing, and a battle breaks out between the player characters, the Starfleet characters, player characters, and the Ferengi merchants and their mercenary crew, right? And their mercenary team that are outside of the Decorah class ship that's back there. Well, basically, the player characters defeat all of the mercs. Actually, they kill 2 of the mercenaries, not intending to, okay? But because essentially they knock a couple of them out, and then meteorites tear their suit open and kill them. So two of the mercenaries are knocked out. One Ferengi is killed, and then another mercenary is knocked out, and the other 4 run. At that point, the Ferengi ship calls out to the Starfleet ship and says, "Hey, what are you doing? You killed 2 of our members, and you're gonna, and we're gonna need you to make that right, right? And also, we're here for the Void Charms. We're gonna take them, right?" Captain Jacqueline Maytine says, "You will not be taking those creatures," and they say, "We will." And at that point, one of the player characters says, "Over our dead bodies." Yells it right at the screen, at the view screen. In which case, the Ferengi say, prepare, forward firing weapons, and then Captain Maytine says, spin up the dorsal and ventral phaser arrays, and then the 2 ships go into this huge bang bang. There's a ship battle, which ends with the Decorer class knocking the dilithium crystals out of alignment, which the chief engineer fixes, but then also doing major damage to the ship and killing over 100 crew members on the ship. But our player character saved over 100 crew members by personally putting themselves in more danger. And at the end, our one-shot ended with the Decorer class really putting with new prototype weapons that had never been seen on a Decorer class before, actually significantly damaging the USS Bryce, and the USS Bryce having to run. And so that was our Genesis Star Trek one-shot Grey Nova. Thank you.